Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today as we delve into the wonderful world of hydrangeas. My name is Jamie Flynn, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Before we get started, I would like to run through a few housekeeping items. Please note that this is a webinar, so your camera and microphone have been disabled. If you have questions at any point during the presentation, go ahead and type it into the Q&A box, and we will either type an answer back to your question or answer it live. We will have some time at the end of the webinar for questions. We will also be sending out a couple of polls during the webinar, as well as a survey at the end of the session, which both are anonymous. And also, for those of you looking to earn your continuing education credits, we will have a follow-up email, which will be sent out within an hour or so after the presentation. And this will have an email link to the required test. And they do ask that you take that within 24 hours of conclusion of the webinar. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel early next week. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our first poll. Kick things off here, and it is, what is your favorite hydrangea species? So go ahead and type in your question there. I'll give you a few seconds here to place your votes. And I can see people are voting away here. Seems Paniculata is in the lead. And we're still getting votes, so I will continue. All right. Excellent. So it does look like Hydrangea Paniculata is the clear winner here. There are the results for you to take a look at. And great. We're going to go ahead and get started with an introduction to our speakers. Our presenters today are Sales and Operations Manager Nikki Moline and Marketing Manager Shannin McInerney. You'll likely recognize Nikki and Shannin if you'd attended any of our educational webinars held over the past couple of months, or possibly from YouTube and Instagram. When Nikki is not sharing her passion for plants via educational webinars and videos, she leads and manages the sales, shipping, and order fulfillment teams to ensure customer expectations are met. Nikki also directs marketing activities and plays a pivotal role in strategic planning. Nikki is an Illinois Certified Nursery Professional, or ICN Pro, and she specializes in perennials. Shannin oversees market initiatives, our display gardens, and company events. She also manages our plant accession process, manages license agreements for our brand programs, and is in charge of pricing. Shannin is also an ICN Pro, specializing in perennials. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Nikki and Shannin.
All right, thank you, Jamie. Good morning, everybody. We are happy to be with you and to talk about hydrangeas this morning. And so we're going to go over the 6 main species that can be grown in North America. We'll kind of go through one by one and hit up some of the attributes of all of them, some of the maintenance practices, and then get into some of our favorite varieties in each category. So I thought it was really interesting on the poll that Quercifolia was second. I kind of wouldn't have guessed that, but we know that some varieties, or some species in particular, have a reputation to be challenging. So hopefully we'll give you some good tips and answer your questions. If there's anything we're not sure of an answer to today, we can definitely check into that for you too. So, like Jamie said, put your questions in the Q&A and we'll try to answer them as we go and take some at the end as well. So definitely let us know. So we are going to start off with Hydrangea Paniculata today. And so those are, as we saw, it seems like people's favorite, and probably because they are on the scale of hydrangeas, probably on the easier end. So The paniculatas are also commonly known as panicle hydrangeas or hardy hydrangeas. PG hydrangeas was kind of an older name for it. So they are hardy to zone 3. So with some of the other varieties, you get into winter hardiness, needing winter protection. So these should be really hardy in most of the United States. One thing that also makes them a little bit easier than some of the other varieties is that they bloom on new wood. So I'm not going to say that you can't screw these up with pruning, but you've got a pretty big window where you can prune these and not have any issues with impacting flowering. So the preferred time is to prune right around now. So kind of as we're coming out of dormancy, especially if some of the buds are starting to break, you can kind of see what might be dead wood and what's good new growth. So now is a great time. I was actually looking out my window at an old tardiva I have the other day, thinking like, oh, if it's nice this weekend, I should get out there. So now is a great time. But if you wanted to prune them a little sooner, you could. I know a lot of landscape companies have dormant pruning rotations. So if you're pruning them in January and February, that's totally fine. It's just nice to leave up the blooms for some winter interest, but pretty much any time as they go into dormancy into early spring, as they start to leaf out is a good time to prune the paniculatas. In terms of how much, recommended is about 1/3 of the growth. But again, these are pretty tough plants where, some of the bigger varieties, if they've kind of overgrown their space, but you don't want to switch them out, you can probably do a little bit more, but 1/3 is the recommended amount. Also, you don't necessarily have to prune these either. So if you like the size that it's at, just kind of cleaning up the spent blooms each year is perfectly fine as well. One thing to think about when you're pruning is, cutting back the thicker, stems, obviously, or the stronger stems. But if you have some smaller, like more spindly type stems, those are good to just take out altogether, because then you'll really push the flower power onto, the good strong stems. So these are the most sun tolerant hydrangea. So most of these varieties prefer to be in full sun. Some of them can take a little bit of shade if that's the situation you find yourself in. And they're pretty tolerant of most soils and things like that. They do want good drainage, so that's one thing to consider. But if you've got like a clay soil, as long as it's draining out somewhere, it doesn't really care if it's clay or loam or more sandy. They can adapt to a wide range of soils. So, one other thing on these is that the flower, actually on most of these hydrangeas, but the paniculatas in particular, the flowers make a great cut or dried flower. So if you have a big plant in August, you can cut some. If you put them in a vase with water, they'll kind of soak up the water, and then you can leave them to dry, and they make beautiful dried arrangements. So getting on to our varieties, the first one we have is Hydrangea Paniculata Flare. And this is part of the Bloomin' Easy series, which is a newer brand program to Midwest Ground Covers. So Bloomin' Easy has a few paniculatas as part of their program, but this is the one we decided to carry to start off with, because we felt that it offered something a little bit different than the rest that we have. So this is on the smaller side, probably maybe not the smallest, but in the range of the smallest ones that we grow at 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. So it's got a nice compact habit, kind of upright, so maybe a little bit taller than wide. And it's named for, or the flare name is a nod to the red color it gets in fall. So you can see those red flowers, and it'll kind of progressively get that way over the course of the summer, where it'll start, pinky at the bottom and work its way up and eventually transition to that red color. So this would be a great variety if you wanted to use it in some containers and didn't want anything that was going to get too big. So that is Hydrangea Paniculata Flare. So next we have, and we're kind of, I think, working our way up in size a little bit as we go through here, but we have Hydrangea Paniculata Zinfandol. So this is part of the Proven Winner series. And I would say this is kind of a mid-height one. So we have a lot of paniculatas that are the really big ones, and we have quite a few that are the smaller, more compact ones. So this is like a good medium-sized one if you're looking for like, just the right size plant for a certain situation. So this will be about 4 to 6 feet tall and wide. And I think the flower color is kind of interesting compared to a lot of the others. You see a lot of the pinks, and this obviously has some pink in it, but it almost has a little bit more of a purpley tone to it, or a mauve tone. And so it is a little bit different than some of the others in that sense. It does age to that darker pink red, so that's where it gets the Zinfandel name. And the flowers, kind of like the flare, are a little bit two-toned, whereas the color works its way up, especially on the background of that lower picture. You can kind of see where it's that pink and it's starting to work its way up the flower. So a nice progression there. One comment overall on the flower color change is what really impacts that is the day to night temperatures. So once we start getting a difference of 10 degrees or more between the daytime temperature and the nighttime temperature, that's when the paniculatas really start to show their color progression. So there are other things that can impact it. So I think if we have a drier summer and things like that, sometimes particularly on some of the older varieties, you'll see a little bit more brown, just I think from the stress of the plant. But there's not a whole lot we can do to control that necessarily. It's not like it's a fertilizer thing. Putting fertilizer on the paniculatas is not going to impact the flower color. So it's just kind of more nature and what the weather is giving us that year. But so Zinfandel, this does start blooming a little bit earlier than some of the other ones. It's not the earliest, and it has a nice upright habit, you can see. So Hydrangea Paniculata Zinfandel. All right, so next we have what is probably the most well-known of the paniculatas, which is Limelight, and its little brother, her little counterpart, Little Lime. So this is kind of the classic one. It's been out over 20 years now, I think. But so Limelight's one of the bigger ones that's going to get 6 to 8 feet tall and wide. Little Lime is going to be more compact, so a little bit bigger than the Hydrangea flare that we talked about first, but 3 to 5 feet tall and wide. And this, you're not going to see, you'll see the pinks on this again as the nighttime temperatures get cooler. But in terms of the flower progression, it goes from that white to the lime color and then takes on that light pink color as it starts to age. So, again, most of you are familiar with this one. So Jamie, if we can get the next slide. So there is a new Limelight coming out called Limelight Prime. So this will be replacing the Hydrangea Limelight, and we will have this one available beginning next year. And so this is an improvement. Like I said, the original Limelight is over 20 years old, and they're always working to improve breeding on these things. So lots of things that they're looking for is stronger stems, better color progression, and new colors. So this kind of takes some of those things into consideration. So Limelight Prime is a little bit smaller than the original Limelight at 4 to 6 feet tall. I think they recognize there's kind of a trend in bringing down plant size a little bit to make it more manageable for people. So a little bit smaller. The one important thing about this is the stronger stem. So whereas Limelight at times, especially if you wouldn't prune it, could get kind of floppy or wild, it has much stronger stems to hold up those flowers. You can see in that picture there, just a nicer, denser, more compact plant. And then the flower color as it ages is also a little more dramatic, I guess. I'm not going to say nicer because it depends on what color you like. But this is going to be a little more intense, kind of the watermelon red as opposed to that light pink color. So Hydrangea Limelight Prime, and we will have this available next year. All right, so then another series that we'll get, or not series, but kind of combo tag team of plants is the quickfires. So we've got Hydrangea Paniculata quickfire and little quickfire. So quickfire is 6 to 8 feet tall and wide, little quickfire 3 to 5 feet tall and wide, so similar to the limelight counterparts. So the thing that was important about quickfire as it came onto the market is it's the earliest to start blooming. So these are reliably in bloom. You know, they typically start in June, so you can count like by the 4th of July that these are going to be in full bloom. So not only do they start to flower, but they also start their color progression earlier than the rest. And I love quickfire. I know a lot of people, or it seems the drive now is to the fuller flowers, but I think it's just a really nice contrast, the more lace cappy type paniculata flower. Especially this one has great fall color. It's, you know, paniculatas aren't necessarily used for their fall color or renowned for it. But the first time I actually remember seeing this plant was in our nursery in, I think it was October or something like that. And it just has a really nice kind of burgundy, purpley fall color. And by that point, the flower has aged to that nice light pink color. So it gives a really nice display in fall, in addition to the fact that it starts really early. So you have this really long season of this plant. So yeah, big fan of quickfire. Then little quickfire, you can see similar in habit, maybe a little bit fuller in bloom just because it's you know, held down a little tighter, but similar to quickfire in the other aspects. So then this also has an improvement coming out. But unlike the limelight, which is like a pretty direct, you know, replacement, quickfire fab is the replacement, and it you can see it looks a little bit different. So what they were going for here is a early blooming, or a plant that blooms as early as quickfire. This actually is going to start blooming a little bit earlier than quickfire, but something that starts blooming early and then has that that more full mop head type flower. So it's similar in size to quickfire. And sorry, I'm getting lost in my notes here. The one thing that I think, especially since I mentioned the fall color on quickfire, that I'm curious to see, they haven't mentioned too much about the fall color on this one. So I don't know if it's going to be the same as quickfire, or if you know, some of these other things have played a more important role in that fall foliage color. It's also going to be a little bit more upright habit. You can see there where quickfire was pretty rounded. This is going to be a little more tall than it is wide. So quickfire fab, we will have this one in 2022 as well. And then our last on the paniculatas, we have the vanilla strawberry and strawberry sundae, which is from the first edition series. So same as the others, kind of the big plant, small plant. So vanilla strawberry is 6 to 7 feet tall and wide, and a slightly narrower. Strawberry sundae is 4 to 5 feet tall and a little bit narrower. And I think one thing that these plants are really known for is that they were kind of the first to have that really nice color progression where you would see the deep pink to the white all on one plant. So it's still really striking, as you can see there. I think the name really is a good representation of it, of that Sundae color. You know, you can kind of see the red to the pink all in one plant, and nice big full blooms. So again, there's been a breeding improvement on the vanilla strawberry, and that will be replaced by berry white. So similar as the other ones, this is going to have stronger stems and hold up the flowers a little bit better. similar in size and similar in flower color. So we'll begin carrying berry white in 2022 as well. So that is it on the paniculatas, and Nikki's going to get into the macrophyllas.
Shannon, we have a quick question on Zinfandol. You were talking about the color changing on the flowers and the day-night temps. Are there any other factors that you know of that would cause the flower color to change, to start seeing that blush?
To start seeing the blush, no, it is going to depend on the temperatures. Sometimes, I guess what I was referencing is like sometimes the intensity of the color, where, you know, some years it seems like they don't look as nice. They're a little more brown, where I think that has more to do with if it was a dry summer, things like that, where if the plant was a little bit stressed. So, but in terms of when you start seeing that color progression, that's going to be dependent on the weather.
Okay, and we have one more question. Can you clip off old blooms now? Which I think you said, yep, now is the time to prune.
Yeah, definitely. So again, if you are not really looking to change the size of your plant at all, yep, now would be a great time to just go through and clip off those old blooms, and then you're good to go.
Good. Thank you, Shannon. All right. Now I get to talk to you guys about Hydrangea Macrophylla, which I know we were talking before about experience level. I think Hydrangea Macrophylla are touted to be maybe easy. That's how they're marketed, when in fact, I think we talk frequently internally, they're not really easy plants to grow. They are, I think, a more advanced hydrangea, like as far as skill set goes. So we're hoping we can give you guys some advice to be a little bit more successful with these plants, but we do acknowledge that they're tough to grow, and we've all had experiences here internally too of having a tough time with Hydrangea Macrophylla. But we said we're all in this together, so hopefully we can point you guys in somewhat of the right direction today. So we have a poll here, and Jamie, if you want to throw that up here, who has had trouble getting their Macrophyllas to bloom? I want to see if we have any Macrophylla experts in the crowd.
And Nikki, while we're doing that poll, I'll answer. There's a question on Paniculata on tree forms. What's the best variety? So we carry Limelight and Quickfire right now. Obviously, with some of the changes, we'll probably be changing some of those over, but those are ones that we found to be a little bit better. I think one thing on the tree form is that stronger stem is really important, because if it doesn't have that, they start to flop. So those are the two that in our trials we found performed the best. So I think we'll be looking to switch some of those out with the new variety changes.
Excellent, thank you. All right, so it looks like maybe 10 of you out there have not had trouble getting your Macrophylla to bloom. So that's great for you guys. Maybe you guys can give us some advice here too. So Hydrangea Macrophylla is also known as a big leaf hydrangea, mophead, or lace cap hydrangea. So they come in all those the two different flower types. It's the only color changing hydrangea, so it's the only one that you can get to turn that blue color in acidic soil. We'll talk a little bit about how to do that here. It is also their hardy zone 4 to 5. It depends on the variety. I would say majority are pretty much zone 5, but there are a few varieties out there that have been tested more in zone 4 climates. They bloom on old and new wood depending on the variety, and we recommend that you prune after flowering. I'm going to dig a little bit into the pruning as well as we go through this. It's definitely a good idea to protect them in the winter. You can mulch them in, kind of give them some bud protection, plant them somewhere where maybe they're not going to be exposed to, heavy winter winds, which cause, the bud kill, cause them to dry out or have that bud kill due to temperatures. And one thing that I've learned recently in talking to people who are breeding Hydrangea Macrophyllas and doing visits to their nurseries where they're trialing, number one issue with Hydrangea Macrophylla that gets them not to bloom is overwatering. So as we know, big leaf hydrangea, okay, they have big leaf surface. So when it gets really hot and humid, the plants flag, and they flag badly. We see them in production do this too. The number one tip they gave is do not overwater. So with Hydrangea Macrophylla, they would like a good soaking once a week. And then after that, some intermittent watering. You may see some flagging during the heat of the day. Watch the plant, stick your finger in the soil. You do have to kind of train your customers too, if you're a landscaper, to pay attention to the plant, but do not overwater. So basically what happens is when these plants start to flag, it stresses them out obviously a little bit. And we want that because that encourages flower production. When a plant is stressed, it tries to reproduce. What does a plant do when it's trying to reproduce? It flowers. So, it makes a lot of sense. Once I learned that, I was like, oh, okay, now I get it. So again, recommendation is do a nice soaking on the plant once a week, especially in the heat of the summer, and then intermittent watering as needed. But make sure you're really feeling that soil, seeing if it's moist. If it's moist and the plant's still flagging, do not water it. It's just the evaporation happening off those leaves because they're so big. So a little note there. And with Hydrangea Macrophyllas, one thing that we definitely recommend is that here we have hot summers. I know we're in a cooler climate, but we still get really hot, humid summers. Make sure that thing is planted in a place where they're going to get afternoon shade. So it's recommended that they get, maybe 4 to 6 hours of morning sun. That's fine, but you want that plant shaded in the afternoon, and that will help a little bit with some of the flagging as well. So, but things that are pretty common with that plant. Another thing on the pruning that I want to recommend, and it's a kind of common error that I see with Hydrangea Macrophylla, is come spring with spring cleanups, people just like cut them back to the ground or they just chop them back. My recommendation, which I know is sometimes not the most attractive, is to let the plant break bud first. That's what we do here in production. We wait to see kind of where the dieback was for the winter, because again, depending on cold, wind, all that kind of stuff, the dieback may vary, by year. So let the plant start to break bud and then do your cutbacks. I get that that's a little bit more labor, but if you're really, really, really wanting your plant to flower, you kind of have to do it. I'm telling you, these plants are not easy plants. They are a bit more advanced. So if you're really wanting flowers on these guys, make sure you watch for bud break before you do a prune on them. All right. So first one we're going to go over is Hydrangea Macrophylla Let's Dance Rhythmic Blue. So this one is definitely one of my personal favorites over like Hydrangea Endless Summer Original. Reason being is the flower color is definitely much more intense. So saturated flower color here. On Hydrangea Endless Summer Original, they're good plants too, but the flower colors are definitely more of a lighter pink or kind of like a baby pink and a baby blue color. This one, the color saturation is going to be really, really deep. The flowers themselves, the petals are a little bit bolder too, a little bit bigger. So kind of a nice statement plant there. And again, with my experience with this plant, what we've seen in production, it is a little bit smaller than Hydrangea Endless Summer Original. So, the plant stays a little bit shorter in stature, but has that really nice flower color. And as with most of these Hydrangea Macrophyllas, they will be pink around here in Illinois, they're going to be pink. But if you do change the soil acidity, they will turn blue. And like I said, we're going to go over that and how to do that a little bit more in detail later on in the presentation. I have a quick question. What does bud break mean? So it means when the leaves start coming out. It's that simple. So it's known as bud break. So when the leaves start to emerge from the buds, you see that green, that's when it's safe to go ahead and do your pruning. All right, next one, a couple of the newer Hydrangea Endless Summer plants, so we wanted to feature them. We definitely feel like internally these are big improvements over Blushing Bride, Endless Summer Original, and Twist and Shout. They've been better growers for us and, more heavily flower producers. So Summer Crush is kind of funny. This plant was bred for flower production mainly. So in production, sometimes it's kind of cute. This plant pushes flowers before it like roots or does anything else. It's just like a little flower machine. So it is slower growing. It's much slower growing than some of the original Hydrangea Endless Summer plants. And this one definitely gets a lot shorter, so 2 to 3 feet, because it's putting most of its energy into flower production. This is the most intensely colored Hydrangea Endless Summer currently that they have. So it gets really dark red raspberry blooms. This one, when it's flowering in the nursery and we have like a house full of them, well, it's like a slam on the brakes kind of situation. People are like, what is that plant? The flower color is so intense. It's amazing. You can do color changing on this, but it will not change to blue. Just want everybody to know that. You know, Endless Summer advertises it as blurple, but it turns more of a, I would say, like a deep purple color. But really nice plant, again, on the shorter side, most floriferous out of the Endless Summer series. And I recommend putting this guy in a container. So I think it's nice, short stature. So if you're doing some container swap outs and want something kind of bold for the summer, I would recommend this guy because it stays really compact, but heavy flower set. And then the next one here we have is Bloomstruck. So this one is actually a bit older than Summer Crush, but gets a little bit bigger, 3 to 4 feet tall. And it also, I know we said blue here. Again, it's more of a blurple one. If you are trying to acidify the soil, it doesn't get that true blue. Endless Summer Original is really the only Endless Summer hydrangea that gets that kind of true blue color. The flower color is not quite as intense as Summer Crush, but still gets that nice deep pink color. It has the most sturdy stems we found out of all the Hydrangea Endless Summer. So very sturdy stems. They're like almost like reddish dark purple. So really interesting stem color too, which I find really pretty. I always like kind of different interest pieces in plants like that. And I found this really interesting. This plant's actually a cross between Endless Summer Original and Twist and Shout, in case you were interested in the breeding. So I found that pretty interesting. And with all the Hydrangea Macrophyllas, they actually can get pretty decent fall color. Bloomstruck has really, really beautiful fall color. So this guy's gonna get kind of reddish purple in the fall, and it is absolutely stunning. So again, I'm a big multi-season interest person. I like plants that do different things in the garden at different times, not just flowers. So this one has good flower set, but also really beautiful stems and really great fall color. So Endless Summer Bloomstruck is one you might want to check out. Okay, so now we're done chatting about the varieties. Now I'm going to get into color changing. So this is going to be a bit of a scientific conversation, and we are going to try and set you guys up for success here. But I'm going to preface it by saying it is not easy. So again, I think you go to your farm and fleet or your garden center, wherever your nursery supply company, and they have color changing amendments. And it's like, oh, it's so easy. Just do this and turn it into the soil and your hydrangeas are going to be blue. That's not quite the case. It is very complicated. It is very scientific. And if you do it wrong, you unfortunately can harm the plant, and kill plants around your hydrangea. So it's very important that you read instructions first and foremost when you buy any of these products, and do research. There's actually a ton of information out there through university extensions on how to color change your hydrangea. So if you have a client that's looking for that, or you're looking to do that yourself, make sure you actually invest the time to do the research up front, because it is complicated. It's not an easy thing. So most often we see these amendments, they're aluminum sulfate to acidify the soil to make the flowers more blue. And then if you were in a place, I think most of our viewers here are from the Midwest, but if you were in a place where the soil was more acidic and you wanted a pink flower, you would add lime to the soil. There are ways that you can acidify the soil that are a bit more natural. With that, I'm not sure you'll get the intensity in the flower color, but you could use things like peat moss or ag sulfur or a nitrate-based fertilizer where your NPK ratio is like 5:1:6. So again, do your research. That stuff's all out there through, university extensions. But if you didn't want to do the aluminum sulfate, you could go with a more natural soil acidifier. I recommend when people plant an endless summer or any sort of macrophylla, if they want to get that color change, maybe throw a bit of peat in the hole when you're, stir it into the soil when you're planting. So you can definitely do that. One thing you want to do is make sure your soil treatments are well in advance of flowering. So start your soil treatments in the fall. If you do the soil treatments while the plant's flowering, it's not going to do anything. It only would change the color on new blooms potentially, but again, it takes the plant a while to absorb the aluminum to get that color change. The treatments may need to be done frequently, may take several weeks or several months to change the color of your hydrangea. Again, read packaging, because one thing that can happen is you can get aluminum toxicity in your plants, or you can raise the salinity of the soil really high, and then it's going to burn your plant. Now, if you have aluminum toxicity in your hydrangea, you're going to see the roots of the plant die. So that's something you may observe, and you'd start to see the flowers and the leaves turn brown. So we definitely don't want to do that. The other thing I do want to mention is a lot of plants are very sensitive to aluminum. So if you have a hydrangea kind of surrounded with other perennials or things, you got to be really careful about your aluminum application as well, because you could kind of kill the plants around it. So maybe, again, do your research, look for plants that are maybe less sensitive to aluminum or like a more acidic soil, plant those things around it. But again, like, I want to set you guys up for success, and I want you guys to know it's not that easy to get your hydrangea to turn blue. So just trying to give you all the information. A liquid drench is definitely best and quickest to get your hydrangeas to turn blue. So again, you can start that in the fall or early spring before the plant actually starts to bloom. Here in our production facility, we do like a mix, I believe. We do a liquid drench with a little bit of a granular as well to get our hydrangeas to turn blue. So that's something that we do. And again, we've had over application. What has happened is the leaf tips turn brown, and that's kind of how we know that that has happened. The other thing you'll see is actually the leaves will turn a bit dark purple too. So again, you kind of know that you have that aluminum toxicity happening. The other thing I guess I want to suggest here as well is it's good to do this on an established plant, not a new planting. You can add a little bit of peat moss or some natural soil acidifier, that's okay. But if you're going to go in with the hard stuff with the aluminum sulfate, I would definitely recommend your plant be in the ground for at least a year, so it gets a really nice healthy root set. And then you can go ahead and try and start amending the soil. So I know that's a lot of information. We wanted to give you guys something kind of not just, oh, these plants are pretty and this is what you do. We wanted to try and give you a little bit more scientific background on Hydrangea Macrophylla and how to do the color changing. So hopefully that's helpful.
All right, Nikki, as we expected, we have a lot of questions on the Macrophyllas, so we'll work through some. We do have a question on pruning in general, but I think let's get through the Macrophylla questions and then we'll get to that. So,
and we do have a slide at the end on pruning, just on pruning. So
yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so LA Dreamin' is something people have carried before. Is there something similar with blue and pink on the same plant? I can't think of one.
I can't think of one either.
I think maybe that I did see something new coming out, but as to what's on the market now, I don't know of one that's similar to that. That's kind of a unique one all to itself.
Yes, agree.
Okay, then I can't get my Bloomstruck to grow in size. It's only a foot or so tall and wide every year. So I will say I have had the same experience. And my plan for this year is I have not fertilized. I'm kind of a lazy gardener at home because I'm tired by the time I leave here. So my plan was to fertilize a little more regularly. But Nikki, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I mean, that is something. So with Summer Crush and Bloomstruck, because they were bred specifically for flower production, outside, I think, of anything else, because they were trying to, I think, solve that issue of, my Hydrangea Macrophylla isn't blooming. So they bred these plants that are just like crazy flower producers, which I know some people still are saying Bloomstruck's not flower either. However, I think some of it is the care. So hopefully if you try a few things, you know, that we recommended here with overwatering and stuff, you'll get better flower production. But because of that, I think because of the breeding, they're bred to flower, not really to put on a lot of growth. So we see the same thing in production. Summer Crush and Bloomstruck are much slower growers than a lot of the original Endless Summer series. So they're not easy plants. I know.
Yes. All right, there's a question. Does Bloomstruck bloom both blue and pink at the same time? No, it does not. So when you're applying that aluminum sulfate or vice versa, you're going to have either the pink flowers or the more purpley flowers.
If you guys put your aluminum sulfate on after it started blooming, your old blooms will be pink, and then depending on your application, your new blooms might start to turn like purplish pink, but it's going to be a slow thing. To get the plant blue, it's going to take a lot of application and consistent application. Okay, we're here in Illinois, we're alkaline soil. So it takes constant adding of that, you know, aluminum sulfate at safe rates to get that plant to stay blue.
Okay, a question. What is the original Endless Summer that has the true blue color you can get when you amend the soil?
That's Endless Summer original. It's the first, it was like one of the original first blue hydrangeas on the market. And that's the one you see the pictures of all the time. It's Endless Summer original.
Trimming options on Summer Crush to keep it nice and compact. I've had some issues with them getting leggy.
I have never seen them leggy. So
I know that's
really
what we
interesting.
like Nikki mentioned, if anything, we see them, you know, they were bred to have a shorter internode length between leaves to keep it nice and compact. So yeah, that was kind of a new one to me too.
Yeah, I mean, you can deadhead a bit in the summer, spot prune a little bit if you want. I don't know, with Hydrangea Macrophyllus, I'm like, when it's growing, I don't want to touch it because they are tricky and I don't know when it's setting buds. It's confusing. So just like let it grow.
Agree. Planting these under a pine tree, would that help with acidity?
It can a bit, but it's not enough to get the blue color, to be honest. You need, again, in our area, you'd have to still do the soil acidification.
All right, a question. Are Macrophylus heavy feeders? Do you suggest feeding all season long?
Yeah, I think they are heavier feeders than others. And I think because, again, they have such like big, robust leaves compared to the other, you know, hydrangeas. So I think that alone kind of makes them a little bit of a heavy feeder. So yeah, I agree with what Shannon was saying. She was having issues with her Bloomstruck, you know, try feeding it a little bit more.
Okay, so we're going to do one last question on the Macrophylus and then we're going to move on so we can get to the others. So do you add aluminum sulfate to the soil around the plant? I think you addressed that,
that's what you do. So you would either get a aluminum sulfate granular that you would stir into the soil around the plant, kind of around the kind of root drip line, or you would do a drench. Now, if you do a drench, do not touch the foliage or the flowers. They will burn immediately. So that'll hurt your plant. So if you're doing a drench, make sure it's safely around the root line of the plant, lift up the leaves, you know, do your drench, but do not get the aluminum on the foliage or the flowers.
All right, so we're going to move on to Hydrangea Arborescens, and these are commonly known as smooth hydrangea. So you're probably most familiar with Annabelle out of this species of hydrangea. And so the thing you want to remember is I kind of think of it that, you know, the paniculatas were a little easier. These are a little easier as well. You know, you see them a lot of places, and these are the two that you want to prune again around now. So it was totally fine to leave them up for this, you know, through the winter. Some people do clean them up in fall just for a neater look. But if you haven't pruned them by then, now is the time. So you want to cut those back to probably anywhere between a foot, maybe 18 inches or so. But you can cut those back. And So they're going to prefer primarily full sun. Some varieties can take a little bit more part shade. These are great planted in mass. Again, that's a lot of time you'll see them in a big group. I think that's kind of where they present themselves the best. And again, older varieties like Annabelle that are a little floppy, they kind of give themselves some, some structure and hold each other up. But we do have a lot of new varieties on the market now in different sizes and colors. So we're going to go through just a few here. So the Incrediball and Incrediball Blush. So Incrediball is going to be the most direct comparison to Annabelle, but it's a big improvement over Annabelle. So where, again, as Annabelle tends to get a little floppy, Incrediball was bred with those strong stems and it stays upright. So, even in the container for you garden center customers out there, it just presents so much more nicely than Annabelle does. Similar in size, where it's going to be about 4 to 5 feet tall and wide. It likes full sun, but again, can take a little bit partial sun or partial shade to it. And these flowers are also going to be even bigger than Annabelle's. So they're going to get to, I don't know, football size or so. So then we also have Incrediball Blush, and that's going to be same habit, pretty much same everything as Incrediball, same nice strong stems, but you have that nice, really kind of interesting pinky blush color to it. So those are Incrediball, Incrediball Blush. So then in the kind of what they're working on now is bringing the size down on these a little bit. So, 4 to 5 feet is a pretty big plant if you have a smaller space. So Invincible Wee White, there's a whole series of Invincible plants and a few of them are more dwarf. This is the smallest of the bunch. So it's going to max out at 24 inches, somewhere between 12 and 24 inches or so. So think of it just as like a really mini Annabelle. Again, nice strong stems. So, it doesn't have that, you don't have that much to go, but, stays upright really nicely and gets that nice age on it, kind of like Annabelle does too, where it'll open white and then transition to green and then to pink. So that's the Invincible Wee White.
All right, Hydrangea Quercifolias, which, like Shannon said earlier, was really exciting to see that this was the second most popular hydrangea. It's definitely super interesting, probably has the coolest leaves out of the whole gang of hydrangeas. So really interesting plant. So of course they're called oak leaf hydrangeas, and that is because their leaves look like oak leaves, which is kind of cool. These plants are probably kind of like the Macrophyllas, not like the most cold hardy plants. They're hardy to zone 5. So again, here, if you're in the Chicagoland area like we are, they are hardy here, but they do need some winter protection. So again, planting them in a place that's a little bit more protected from the wind and doing some mulching on the roots can definitely help this plant. But in a cold winter, sometimes we can see die back to the ground on this guy. So this one also blooms on old wood, so you can prune after flowering if necessary. But a lot of times people with these oak leaf hydrangeas grow them to be statement pieces. They're kind of coarse, larger, even though there are some dwarf varieties now, but kind of coarse statement pieces in the landscape. So you can prune if you want, but it's old wood like a paniculata. So, like a macrophylla. And like I said, winter protection's good here. They prefer organically rich, well-drained soils. So again, if you're going to plant them, make sure they're in a place that is well-drained. They don't like to have really wet feet. And they also like their roots, their feet, really cool in the summer. So actually, it is recommended that you do some mulching around the base of these plants, around the roots of these plants, just to help, because in the summer, kind of heat and humidity, it can take a toll on these guys. And let's see here. Some varieties can sucker. The varieties we're going to go over today, we don't really see a lot of that, but it is native. This plant is native to Georgia, Louisiana, and Florida, which I think is really cool. So it is native to the United States. So first one we're going to talk about here is Gatsby Gal. This is a proven winter variety. This one can get to about 4 to 6 feet tall. So this is on the taller side of the ones that we grow. Blooms June to July. The kind of claim to fame on this one is the very, very long flower stalk. So these guys get really, really big flowers. Like most of the other quercifolias, they will age to a pink later in the season, kind of like a paniculata. So the flowers do a very similar thing. And what's really cool about this plant is it gets wine red fall color, really beautiful, striking fall color. So again, Hydrangea Quercifolias aren't just about the flowers. They have really great coarse foliage, and we get some really cool fall color out of them too. So multi-season interest plant. Hydrangea Munchkin is one of the smaller quercifolias. So if you have a love for quercifolias and maybe a smaller space, Munchkin might be a great one for you to try out. Again, same bloom time. Most of these Hydrangea Quercifolias are full sun to part shade. Again, we kind of recommend maybe more on the part shade side. So make sure they get about 6 hours of sun during the day, but then they can take some afternoon shade. These do the same color change. So they're going to come out white and fade to that rich pink color later in the season. And this one also has really big flower panicles. So these flower panicles were measuring, over 6, maybe about 7 inches long. So for such a tiny plant, gets really huge flowers. Mahogany red fall color on this one. And this one is a variety bred by the U.S. National Arboretum. And then the last Hydrangea Quercifolia we have, which I think is really my favorite Hydrangea Quercifolia, to be honest, is Ruby Slippers. So this one is going to color change the fastest. So again, it's going to emerge white, but it's going to change to that pink color really quick. So we have a lot of these, or a couple of these, planted in our hydrangea trials here, and we do see that pink color set in pretty quickly during the season. We have our Hydrangea Quercifolias too, just so you guys know, planted in a part shade location. They actually get pretty heavy shade, well, not heavy shade, but they're in a part shade location. So a little bit of morning sun, afternoon shade, and they perform pretty well. So like I said, plan for about 6 hours of morning sun and throw these guys in a place where they get some afternoon shade. And this one also gets red fall color and was also introduced by the U.S. National Arboretum. The U.S. National Arboretum is doing a lot of breeding on Hydrangea Quercifolia, apparently. So, but this one's definitely my favorite.
All right, so we're going to move on to Hydrangea Serrata, or these are commonly known as mountain hydrangea, and they get their name for their serrated leaves. Kind of the edges of the leaf are really toothed. So these are going to be most similar to the Hydrangea Macrophylla in kind of what they're looking for, but they're more of a lace cap flower. And they're also hardier than the Macrophyllas, where these originally come from the valleys or the mountain valleys of Japan, where it gets quite a bit colder there. So these are going to have better hardiness and better bud hardiness. If we have a late spring, frost snap or something, sometimes it can damage the Macrophyllas, where this should be able to hold up to it and a little bit better. So these also, as Nikki mentioned on the Macrophyllas, are going to do best in part shade. So you kind of, again, want them, morning sun with some afternoon shade to protect them from the heat, especially in the midst of a hot summer. And these also will take some or do some color change with aluminum sulfate, but it's not going to be as dramatic as the Macrophyllas. So you'll see when we get to the next slide. These are kind of like a spectrum maybe between like bluey purple and purpley pink. So you're just not going to get that intense of a change like you would on the Macrophyllas. So these, again, like the Macrophyllas, you want to prune on the old wood, just so you're not cutting off any new blooms that year. So if anything, like Nikki said on the Macrophylla, in spring, you can just clip off the old flower heads, but then you kind of just want to leave it alone so you don't prune any coming flowers off. So there are 3 varieties in the Tough Stuff series: Tough Stuff Red, and Tiny Tough Stuff. So you can see they've all got kind of similar habit, similar flower type. So Tough Stuff is the original, and you can see it's kind of that bluey purple flower color. So that probably, it might be a little more purpley pink in our more alkaline soils, and you can kind of get it a little more on the blue side if you add aluminum sulfate or fertilize with aluminum sulfate. Tough Stuff Red is just, the picture we have there is kind of pinky purple, but that will also be a more intense red in alkaline soils. And then with the more acidity will be more that pinky purple color. So those both get about 2 to 3 foot tall and wide. And then Tiny Tough Stuff is about 1.5 to 2 feet tall and wide. And otherwise it's kind of similar to Tough Stuff in terms of the flower color and the change between alkaline and acidic soil.
All right, we know we're getting close on time. We're probably going to go over a little bit, but it's because we knew we were going to have a lot of questions today. We want to answer your questions, so hang on if you can. If you guys got to leave at 11, that's understandable. Question on the Serratas: do they bloom better if they're allowed to flag? I would say so. So Hydrangea Serratas and Macrophyllas are actually really similar. Where they're native to is in Japan, in the mountains of Japan. So Macrophyllas were found in like the valleys, warmer temperatures, and Serratas were found in the mountains. So that's why they're more cold hardy. But the leaf structure, they're still kind of bigger leafed. So again, that evaporation is going to happen. So they will flag a little bit harder than some of the other varieties. You know, Arborescens will flag too in the summer when it gets really hot, and it's just, you know, due to the heat of the day. So. All right, Hydrangea Petiolaris. So this is the only climbing hydrangea, and it's a kind of slow to establish vine, but then once it is established, it'll be pretty vigorous. These guys can get really tall. So depending on the location, can get about 30 to 60 feet tall by 6 to 8 feet wide. Really cool, interesting plant. Petiolaris in particular is preferred over the straight species because it actually has heavier flower set than the just Hydrangea anomala. And this guy's really cold hardy, so zone 4 to 8. We actually have one of these planted at our natural garden facility. So when we acquired the property, there's a really big tree when you drive in, and this actually, we have a beautiful Hydrangea Petiolaris climbing up that tree. So really, really stunning guy, can take full sun to part shade. Again, you guys can, if you have a massive tree, this guy looks really cool if you plant it next to that and get it to climb up. And I'm going to actually do a little shout out to Schizophragma here, which is false hydrangea vine. I'm a huge fan of it. Nobody plants it and it makes me sad. But we have Schizophragma Rose Sensation, which is a proven winner. So it gets that nice kind of pink color if maybe you want the pink versus the white, but the plant looks really similar. The flowers are a bit more open and the petals on the flowers are a bit bolder, but really cool plant. So if you're looking for a really bold vine, you could try either this one or the Schizophragma. Okay. So we're going to go into why didn't my hydrangea bloom and a little bit about pruning. And I'm going to talk about the slide, but Shannon can pipe in too if she has comments. So again, we've talked about this a bit during the presentation, but pruning is really the #1 reason why people have the issue with hydrangeas blooming. I would say probably the second being watering. There's lots of confusion on what kind of hydrangea you potentially have. So that can definitely be complicated. You know, a Serrata and a Macrophylla, if it's not leafed out, I mean, that could be really difficult to tell which is which. You might not be able to tell. But once the plants are actually in leaf, you should be able to ID them. Paniculatas are the most woody, and you know, the leaf is very different. Hydrangea Arborescens has a fuzzier leaf, and it, you know, tends to die back to the ground every year. You can prune it back to the ground every year. Macrophylla has the biggest, boldest leaf. Serrata has a smaller leaf, kind of looks like Macrophylla, but it's serrated. And Quercifolia has an oak type leaf. So if you're IDing your hydrangeas, that's definitely the way that I would do that. If you have a question too, you could always email us at mgsales@midwestgroundcovers.com. And if you get a picture of the foliage or the flower, we can try and help you ID it. It may not be the specific variety because that can be really difficult, but at least we can point you in the right direction for species. So then you know how to care for them. So as a reminder, hydrangeas that bloom on old wood are going to be your Macrophyllas, Serratas, Quercifolias, and Petiolaris. Now, I will say a lot of the new breeding with the Macrophyllas claim they bloom on old and new wood, so keep that in mind. Prune after flowering if needed. And then our hydrangeas that bloom on new wood are Paniculatas and Arborescens. So like Shannon said, those are the easy ones. It's really hard to kind of mess them up. You might like prune too hard, maybe, but for those guys, they're going to bloom on old or on new wood. So once they start pushing growth, you should see flower production. And again, like Shannon had said earlier, prune in late winter, early spring. And then next slide, just wanted to give a resource and then we'll jump into a few more questions. And again, if you guys can stay, please do. If you got to leave, that's totally okay. We're going to send out a link to this document when we send you guys your thank you email for attending. But this is a really, really actually great document that Proven Winners put together. And you can kind of follow the flow chart. It has photos, which I think is really helpful. And so if you're having an issue, just kind of follow through to figure out maybe what you need to change as far as your horticultural or cultural care practices. So I know you can't really read this, but we'll be sending a link out to it. You know, keep a copy at your desk, pin it up on a wall. Our sales reps have it because it is helpful to just troubleshoot what's going on with your hydrangeas. So now let's jump into more questions because I see there's quite a few. We'll try and answer as many as we can.
Yeah, so there's a question about Hydrangea Halo and if we have more information on that. So that's a plant that we've actually been trialing here. So if you're interested or, you know, have a place for it, we would love to know that. So it's been kind of deemed as a great pollinator plant because it's an arborescens, but it is a lace cap. So it has the sterile flowers in the center, which are great for pollinators. They like flock to this plant. So yeah, you might see that one coming. So definitely, if you're interested, let us know. We love that kind of feedback to see if that's something that we should look into carrying. Nikki, you want to grab any of these? The salt tolerant question, which hydrangeas are salt tolerant? One that probably your best bet, again, because it's the toughest, is going to be the paniculatas. I think the arborescens should do fine with that as well. I would probably stay away from, you know, if you have a high salt area, the macrophyllas and the serratas again, just because they're a little more, you know, susceptible to the different chemistries and things like that.
Yeah, quercifolias too actually are a bit more on the salt tolerant side. So that definitely use that one. Can you rate the various species as to rabbit resistance? You know what, we live in the Midwest. When rabbits are hungry, unfortunately, like deer, they're gonna eat most anything, especially in a tough, harsh winter. So I don't think any of these are really more rabbit resistant than others. We have a lot of really hungry rabbits around here. So
I would say probably the worst that I've seen is the Quercifolia.
Yeah.
You know, I think the wood might be a little bit softer. So I've definitely seen rabbits kind of mow those down over the winter. Whereas, you know, arborescens, again, since you're pruning them back in spring, it's not going to really impact that too much. And, you know, paniculata, because that's a pretty, you know, sturdy, the stems are pretty sturdy and woody. I don't think they go after those as much. So
the question about the best hydrangea for an east side of commercial building with stone mulch and not much supplemental watering. No stone mulch. Don't do that to the plants. I get why in theory, but honestly, that's not good for any plants. A lot of plants would have a tough time living in that condition. But I would say, again, paniculatas are probably the toughest out of all the species, but I'm still not even sure that they would survive a stone mulch situation, but they probably would survive the least without a lot of supplemental watering. So as far as that question goes. Let's see here. Have we ever used the straight species Hydrangea Arborescens? Yeah, you know, that's a nice plant if you have more of a wild area, I would say. They're not super compact and they can get a little, if you have a more manicured, I would say landscape, maybe not the right application. We don't grow the straight species because, you know, our customer base is looking more for that kind of manicured thing, and we don't have a very expansive native shrub line yet, but that is a nice plant. It's great for pollinators. So yeah, if you have the area for it, I would definitely say it's a good one.
There's a question on the Macrophylla. Should one cut out all the old stems? I think you can do that, but as Nikki said, you really want to wait until you've seen what's leafed out. So yeah, I mean, at some point it's okay to go in and clean that up, but I would really wait for the plant to fully flush out before you do that.
What's the best hydrangea for shade? I would say probably Macrophyllas because they appreciate the shade, and it'll definitely help with the flagging and kind of them getting really tired in the summer. But like I said, our Quercifolias here on the property, I mean, they're planted in a somewhat shady area and they do really well. So the Serratas, Macrophyllas, and Quercifolias, but Macrophyllas first, I would say.
Yeah, even, you know, some of the older arborescens like Annabelle,
yeah.
you know, that'll do okay in shade. The newer ones, I guess I haven't seen them as much. Well, I think we've seen them in some shadier spots too. So, you know, I think it does depend, because obviously the more you get them in shade, then you might impact the flowering or the floppiness a little bit. But it's going to depend on what kind of shade and what kind of sun it's getting to. So, you know, a lot of things, morning sun's preferred. You want to keep them out of the afternoon heat. So it is going to be a little bit site specific, but I think with paniculatas, I would say are the one that don't bother planting that in shade. No. It's not going to do anything, but the others you could probably kind of play around with.
How much shade can an oak leaf really take? You know, I was doing a lot of research on that, and it says up to 6 hours in warmer summer climates. So if it's a hot and humid summer, they can take up to 6 hours of shade, but I would say 4 to 6 hours. That's standard part sun requirement.
Okay, so there was a question earlier about pruning and if you forget, you know, what you have and when to do it. I would say if you're not sure what you have, again, kind of tread cautiously in spring and maybe just do a cleanup on the old blooms. It would probably be better if you're not sure what you have to kind of do a little cleanup maybe in fall, you know, to kind of take some stuff in as things are finishing blooming before those buds are set. Because again, if you think that you have something, you know, you think you have an arborescens and it turns out to be a Macrophylla and you do a big cut back in spring, then all your flowers are gone. So definitely tread cautiously this time of year, and you're best off just trying to identify what you have.
On the Limelight question, what if we like the original better than the new 2022 variety? They'll still be on the market, but they're coming off patent, so you're not going to see them advertised as Limelight. You're going to see them advertised, I can't remember what the name is, but the
botanic Wren something, I think.
Yeah. So you won't see it out there as Limelight, just so you guys know.
Wood borer, we have a question about wood borer damage on the Paniculata standards. I don't think we've seen any issue with that. Nikki, can you say?
I don't think
I haven't heard anything on that. So
no. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We knew we were going to get a lot of questions today because hydrangeas, they're such a favorite among the industry, but I get they're a little bit complicated. So thank you for spending the time with us. Our sales team, you know, we try as hard as we can to be experts. So definitely reach out to your sales folks, or, you know, you can reach out to Shannon and I too directly if you have questions. Otherwise, make sure you guys subscribe to our Instagram page and our YouTube page because we're constantly putting out education. You'll be able to find this presentation there if you want to share it. And Shannon and I are going to start up our garden walk soon. So that's a great way for you guys to see what's going on in the garden. And we'll be sure to be checking out the hydrangeas. Maybe we'll do one early spring so we can show you guys bud break and that kind of thing. So you know what to do. So make sure you follow us on Instagram and stay tuned.
In the next week or so, or right around there, we should have another one out. So.
All right, with that, thank you guys and have a great rest of your Friday and happy spring.
Thank you.